So as I put on my LinkedIn, this webinar is basically completely driven by you and your questions. So the plan of what we're going to cover is this. First of all, I'm going to talk about the value, because a number of you raised questions about establishing the value of change agents themselves. And I think this actually goes to a wider piece about the value of change management. So we'll touch on that. If you've got questions in between, just put them in the chat. Teresa will be reading everything, and she's experienced enough to interrupt me at any point when she thinks there's a relevant question coming up. We can do questions at the end as well, but if you've got burning questions, just ask them, because I'm going through the 5 pages of questions, but I'll try and answer everything. Had lots of questions about the role, who should be doing it, how many people should be doing it, where are they coming from. So we'll talk about all of that. We'll talk about their core activities and the characteristics of change agents. And then we'll start to look about the motivation for having a network in the organisation as a whole, but also the motivation for the change agents. And then we'll talk about how we build their capability and how we track progress. So there's a lot to fit in. So I will go fast and furious because there are so many questions that you've got. So the first thing, I always sort of go back to quote some others when I'm looking for, why are change agents relevant? And I did find this report from McKinsey in 2017 talking about transformational change and the fact that they identified that a network of agents does have a notable impact on success. But they sort of said, that those who did actually put a network in place were twice as likely to report success at particularly the sort of transforming the organizational culture, how we do things around here, rather than just having put some tangible change in place, getting to a point where it's used and it becomes the new norm and therefore benefits are realized. You're sort of twice as likely to be successful. But also right in the middle of the report, there was something around less than half of respondents said that their organizations actually select these employees. So even though we recognise that perhaps change agents are giving up a lot of their time and mental energy to this, perhaps the formalisation of a network isn't, as good as it could be. But I will point out that this report is 3 years old, and 3 years doesn't sound that long, but I've been in a lot of thought leadership panels week on week. It's part of my job, not only within the Change Management Institute, but generally speaking, I chair a CEO group and a couple of other groups of directors of transformation. And on Friday, I was involved in a panel that I thought was really interesting because it was talking about how the change management function or the change management discipline perhaps is moving on. And that we are sort of getting better at this. And I do think that there is a service that we can perform. It's become a key competency as a change professional for me, that I am able to stand up a change agent network. I know exactly how to structure it. I know what I'm looking for. I know what I need to get them to do. And that is because there is an increasing number of organisations who are requesting this and who are deliberately saying, do you know what? To make change happen, this isn't going to be a small sort of project team off to the side here. This is actually going to be the mobilisation of effort across our organisation. So I often work this kind of work, and I've been doing, I don't know how many change agent networks I've set up. I did try to count them and I lost it after 157. But it was the point that many of the boards that I work for are not saying to me, they don't say, and we need you to set up a change agent network, because that's not the phrase they use. But one CEO I'm working with at the moment, his point, and he passionately believes in this, which I admire him for, is he says, I want those who are going to work in the new ways to be the ones who help create the new ways of working. And therefore, he is effectively asking me to set them up as a network of sort of change agents participating in directing the change and taking it out to their colleagues. But he's never used that phraseology. And I think, again, that just shows that come change management in the boardroom, our language isn't necessarily used, because I don't think we've won that war yet. But this is certainly becoming a sort of standard offering, which is why I wanted to do this webinar actually. And I think the 5 pages of questions that you guys sent me indicates that possibly I'm not the only one who's setting up these networks. I think as far as the value is concerned, there are a couple of things that I think we need to make the case for. First of all, if we don't have change management, what tends to happen is that we pay out lots of money on the project life cycle. Here on the left in the red, you know, the money's going out, but then the return on investment, you know, that we get, well, if we don't manage that change, yeah, eventually people will sort of catch on to the things that have been created and put in place. But it will be more accidental than deliberate, and we might get some return on investment. We might realize some benefits, but had we done it more deliberately, then we would have got greater return on investment, and we would have brought it forward earlier. And I think there's no good research out there that's generic. McKinsey is probably the best place to look for some examples of that, and I do go hunting when I'm trying to make this argument. But also, I have found that I can make this argument anecdotally in an organisation, because there are always stories where people tell me about project investments that they have made, often in IT, but it's not the only place, where they haven't then realised the benefits, because what they have created or what they have invested in hasn't actually been picked up and become the new norm. Nobody's actually using it. So I think if you're looking for the how do I establish the value, do not overlook the power of those anecdotal stories, because they are there and they mean something to people, and they are probably the best argument you've got within your organisation. So use this diagram to keep thinking about it, but that's what you want to go and look for. There's also some interesting papers out there around positive conversations about doing things differently. And effectively, that's what change agents do. I mean, they are talking to their colleagues, they're role modeling, they're storytelling, and it's all about new ways of working. And there is some fantastic research out there that it's all about the fact that the more conversations you're having about this, you're actually building the capacity, you're increasing all the time the capacity your organisation has for doing things differently, because actually it's seen more as the norm. So what you're doing all the time is really sort of decreasing, you're bringing down the reactive, the inhibiting conversations, the resistance to the change. So the more you talk up doing things differently and putting that as a sort of, you know, something that people want to get involved in, the more you're sort of shutting down the negative conversations. And what effectively it does is it does increase the rate of change across your organisation. So again, it's just thinking that actually what I want to have is a network of people who are really talking up the change. Now, if I want to trail back into positive psychology, I will find an awful lot of evidence, which is about the fact that you can talk yourself into success, because it increases commitment to making change happen, it increases resilience, it increases creativity and innovation and ideas, whereas negativity decreases all of those things. And of course, it's the commitment, it's the resilience, and it's the innovation and an appetite for change that makes change a reality. So effectively, and I think, again, this is going to go to the heart of what's the difficult sell, our change agents are having deliberately curated conversations. We help them curate those conversations, but they are having deliberate conversations with their colleagues about the possibilities that these changes will actually give their colleagues, their ways of working, and the organisation as a whole. So actually what I'm trying to sell to a board is that I'm trying to sell, I've got a whole load of people talking to other people in your organisation, but they are actually saying what you want them to say, rather than the kind of conversations, the negative rumours that tend to build up. So I hope I'm highlighting that it's very, you know, you have to work very hard at the beginning to establish what it is you're setting up, what will the network actually do, and why does it matter? Because an awful lot of it is subjective, because that's the nature of change. The nature of change is that we are asking people to behave a different way. And that is a personal decision that's taken in the head of everybody that's involved. And what we're trying to do, therefore, is we're trying to shift their feeling, their view, their perspective. And that's also incredibly difficult to look at. I mean, we could get onto a whole new webinar on measuring the impact of change. Let's have a look at the core activities. I've just alluded to them, but I think that what we want is a whole army of people who can explain the change positively to their colleagues. Obviously, losses do have to be acknowledged, but what I'm doing with my change agent networks is I'm feeding them all of the benefits, the improvements, the advantages, the possibilities that the change brings, so that wherever they come up against negativity, they've got ammunition, if you like. Because at the end of the day, I want them involved in generating the buy-in and support. Loads of techniques to be able to actually do that. I've just put a couple in there, but we want them to have those conversations, those debates, and we want them to help create a menu of things that people can do on the ground, relevant to their job, that helps them shift from doing it one way to doing it another. So it's very much that lower level on the ground that really our change agent network is actually doing. We've already talked about resilience as a key thing. Let's have a little look at what it is that we really look for. And if I look along the left-hand side for a moment, what I'm looking for on the y-axis is that I'm looking for a fundamental understanding of the area of business that's being changed. In other words, I do need people who are subject matter experts, because the wheels fall off pretty quickly if they're talking to their colleagues and they don't really understand the current ways of working, the current processes well enough to be able to appreciate the scale of the leap that's being taken, and that they can't get into a really good debate about what will be new, what will be different. So what are we adding? What are we losing? What are we taking away from the existing process? What within the existing process are we amending? You know, if they can't have those detailed conversations, then they start to lose their credibility. Now that goes to a number of you who raised questions about whether or not, you know, should we have full-time change agents, or should they be managing more than one change? So let's get to the heart of those questions. The most important thing for me is that they don't lose their foot in the existing business. My most successful change agents are not seconded into a change effort over the next 1 or 2 years, that they retain their credibility, that they are still active in the job that they do, that they still have perhaps a supervisory role, that they are still managing a team. Now, partially their time is taken up by thinking out the new ways of working and working perhaps with the project team sometimes, but that they also, every day, they still return to base, if you like. They still return to their day job. Now, that brings us to the heart of another success criteria, which is that if we are to set this up, we have to have very difficult conversations with their line managers, and therefore we do need strong sponsorship for this, because what we need to make sure is that there is an opportunity for them to give up some of their responsibilities, perhaps give up some of the time that they're currently doing their day job. Otherwise, you know, we're making it an impossible job for them. I've got an exercise going on at the moment where I've just asked a team to have a look through their diaries, have a look through, and particularly now that everything's on a Zoom call and that everything is virtual working, I've sort of said, look at where your week has gone. And I've given them a simple little kit to do. I basically said to them, right, I want you to draw up your own sort of grid for the last 5 days, Monday through Friday. And I want you to map on there where your time went. So don't just stare at your Outlook calendar, right? Just have a little look genuinely about where your time went. And what I'm going to say to you is, if you're going to join this change agent network, which they're very motivated to do, by the way, because it's a fantastic career opportunity for them. We'll get on to that in a moment. I've sort of said, right, you need to find 1/3 of the time. So what meetings can you ditch? What things are you doing that actually are, let's stop doing them. They're not as necessary as we thought they were. They won't be needed in the new world, so let's stop doing them now, is always a good argument. Or can you delegate to somebody else? What can you strip out? And it's an incredibly challenging thing. I mean, if any of us sat there and tried to strip out 1/3 of our tasks, and what you tend to end up with is a bit of a compromise. They never get they never get to the full third for a start, but at least they do free up some time. And I often, what tends to happen is I get them looking back over the last week, and they actually go back a bit further and they genuinely have a think about where their time is going. And the ones that you know are going to be good at this are actually going, yeah, this is already quite hard. I've been given my first challenge, but they actually do it. And they work out, yeah, I'm going to have to give up some time for this. So I think on the left-hand side, subject matter expertise is critical, but they can't walk away from their existing role. Now, that isn't to say that you probably will find that sometimes your change agent is actually the linchpin of more than one change. Because the reason that they became a change agent in the first place, the reason that they are in your target group is because of their subject matter expertise. So you're probably not the only initiative that's gunning for them. And I think you have to have quite a sensible conversation about how they actually knit the changes together so that they're not actually trying to give up a third of all of their time and sort of running out of time. But actually, I think in my experience, people can be a change agent for more than one change very successfully, but they cannot be an effective change agent if they are seconded. It works initially, but then they start to lose contact and they start to lose credibility. And that also goes along the bottom around their authority. And the point is, as we know with change agents, they have no sort of delegative authority. They have no hierarchical authority. They can't say, you will do this. So it's all based on their persuasive powers. So it is, you know, if they've got a job title that gives them a bit of hierarchical power, that's fantastic. But the rest of it is going to be that sort of interpersonal authority, that sort of specialist knowledge, the charisma, the trustworthiness, their flexibility, their emotional intelligence. It's all of those characteristics that make them the ideal candidates. Those that don't have much subject matter expertise and certainly don't have much followship, shall we call it, down the bottom left-hand corner definitely aren't suitable. And I'll go even further and go, actually, you've got to watch those because I'm not sure they're suitable for employment in the 21st century generally. So what development activities are you doing with those people? Because, you know, at the end of the day, the things we're talking about aren't just skills for change agents. They are skills for anybody who's working in an organization that is hugely subject to change. So I think this can be quite helpful in sort of thinking about, yeah, what kind of development path have I got for my staff generally?
Melanie?
Hopefully I was going to say, am I answering the questions?
Yes, there's a question. The question is, does the level of commitment and support for the change also need to be taken into account to select change agents, i.e. you could have a strong subject matter expert with followership, but who is not supporting the change? Is it good to include some of these skeptics?
Now, do you know what? We had a big debate at this at the Change Management Institute that was about 18 months ago. And there was sort of generally a split down the room. I think the ultimate answer is it does depend on the person themselves. If they are a skeptic, but an open-minded skeptic, in that the moment they're not persuaded that the change is as beneficial as it could be, but perhaps what they are prepared to do is use their specialist knowledge to help shape the change, to continue working on the change, to make sure that it can be improved and that the initial idea isn't quite right for some of the ways of working, but if it was tweaked, they could actually help it, then I'm all in favour of that, because actually what I've got is I've got a critical friend. But we also know the difference between what I've just described and somebody who is hell-bent on actually making this fail. And therefore they might have all the charisma in the world, and that's fantastic, and they have persuasion, but actually I'm not personally a big fan of bringing them in because they can be so disruptive. Now you might be arguing in your head, well, if you leave them outside the tent, then they're going to be causing chaos because they've got the persuasive power. But what I have found is that what I'm doing is those I bring into the network have access to privileged information that others do not. And I think that the ones who make all the noise and fury they can be quite distracting to begin with, but their power lessens quite steeply as we get going, because they're not involved in all the pilots, they're not having the latest information. So their objections continue to object, but they become less persuasive, because actually more and more of their colleagues are getting involved, and they're now starting to be the mad person in the park who's shouting at the pigeons rather than being a credible force. So that might sound very aggressive, but I've been there a lot. And I know the difference between a critical friend who I am happy to bring into the circle, because I think that they're not objecting for the sound and glory of their own voice. They're objecting because they think it's not quite right, but they're not objecting to the general idea that we have to change to continue to grow and to continue to improve. So maybe the heart of it is, but do they have a genuine belief in continuous improvement? Or are they a genuine laggard who is actually saying, no, 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 push back the waves, I'm King Canute, I'm going to stop the waves hitting the beach. So I think it's a very personal choice, and it also comes down to confidence. I think that when I was younger and less experienced, I'd try to bring everybody in and I'd want everybody to be my friend. As I've grown older and more experienced, I have realized that I can be quite deliberate in who I choose, and that, as I've said, those that are all sound and fury and that I exclude. It's done very deliberately. It doesn't mean to say I won't obviously have a lot of conversations with them, so that perhaps I draw their fire, and I see that certainly as my role. But I don't involve them in activities where they are just looking to pick holes all the time, because it distracts, and it also makes a lot of people uncomfortable and they lose confidence. And it's those I want to concentrate on. So I'll just draw their fire elsewhere. But as I keep them away from everything that's going on, they become less powerful over time because they really don't know what's going on. I don't know if that's answered the question, but what I'm going to go on to is, so many questions about this. This really was about the structure of things. And I'm talking now from, so much experience, is that where does the change agent network come from? It comes from whoever you are in your organization, that you're a change management professional, and that you've realized that for this change, it might be you are a singular change management function who happens to be attached to a particular project or change or program, and realizes that we need some kind of network. Or you might be in a central function and actually it's become a part of your standard offering to set up a change management function. But it has to start with somewhere. In other words, this change management function, see that as the sort of the ownership box. Now, what I've put down here is it depends on the size and scale and the number of networks, but I've put down change professionals. In that, one of the things I do know is that you cannot maintain a network. You can always set one up, but you can't make it effective unless you dedicate some resource to looking after it. It is a network, it's a volunteer network, and time needs to be given over to basic administration as much as anything, booking in sort of workshops, booking in training sessions, booking in the opportunity to bring people together. Networking doesn't happen by accident, it has to be planned. But also that an ongoing role is for looking after people. You are going to empower a group of individuals to help you make the change a reality, and they are going to come up against problems, logistical problems. They're going to come up against problems of bits of the change not really working or having a more detrimental effect on business as usual than was hoped. They're going to come up against resistance to change. I guarantee you they're going to need emotional support. And you're going to have to get on the phone and you're going to have to talk to them, and you have to build strong relationships. So somebody somewhere has to be involved in that. Now, I've done that. I'm doing that at the moment. I happen to be not only the change management function, but the person who is looking after a network in the UK and the US. But at the same time, I've also set up another one for a much bigger change, where we have a change management team, a centralized team. And I've basically set up 3 of the change management professionals within that team. It's not a full-time thing, but they are, if you like, they are the owners, and they are the sort of the home team that those in the network can go to. So don't forget that those guys need to be there. And what we need to set up under those guys, if it's you set up the first level of your network. So you identify who are your key players, but also never forgetting that it's also a cascade that you're looking for. The people that we were looking to include were those that have got the interpersonal skills, the emotional intelligence, to actually be able to develop a network of their own. Oh, and by the way, when it comes to some of the skills that I talked about down here around followship on the bottom there, I do believe, and I've actually made this a core part of the Agile Change Agent qualification that I'm the Chief Examiner for. I honestly believe, and there are lots of techniques to do it, that you can increase your followship. You might not be the most confident social person, or you might have people who are real subject experts who are not necessarily people. But there are ways in which you can help them build stronger relationships. There are techniques that you can do to actually increase that. So I think that that's absolutely essential that we do that. And part of looking after the network is helping that to happen. So what you want is for them to build their cascade, and for them to build their cascade, and for them to build their cascade. So I had an awful lot of questions about how many change agents should there be, how big a structure should there be. So I put the answers here, basically. The sizing rules. There is no one size fits all, guys, I'm afraid. You need to think about geographic dispersal. Now, at the moment, it's got a lot harder. It used to be that if I had, here's two example stories. I had a national chain who had 67 sites within a country. Now, clearly, what I needed was a representative of change in each of those 67 sites. So that initially gave me 67 contact points. And in fact, what we did to make that manageable is we then divided it into north, south, east, and west. So we basically had 15 or 16 people in each of those groupings. From there, as I said, we had the 67, and of course one person in a national sort of site isn't enough. So of course they had to build their network. So they were my key point person, but they obviously had to build their own network. And in fact, because it was a big department store sort of chain, obviously there are different floors, there are different departments, and it was basically they had to set up a network. So you had quite a lot of people underneath them. I mean, an average store actually had about another 15 people that you could genuinely call within the change agent network. Equally, a friend of mine is a CEO of a business with 47 staff, and she might be the chief executive, but she says, I'm also the chief change agent. And she says, what I tend to do is if we've got a big change coming, if we're going to be launching new products and services, if we're going to be streamlining something, reorganizing, whatever it is, I get on the table, I talk to everybody, we have beer and pizza afterwards. And she said, then I've got sort of my department managers become my key change agents, and that's how it works. So I think that gives you a sort of understanding of pre-corona what things might have been. I think now the geographic dispersal is harder because it's really put everything up in the air, because I think what we're having to do, and it's all about virtual leadership, is you're having to get people to really consider not their physical sort of where they sat in a physical sort of presence, but genuinely what is their sphere of influence now? Which networks are they connected into? Who are they working with? Who do they get on the calls with most often when they're doing their work? And basically we're finding, of course, that those teams are a lot smaller. So what I'm seeing is the need to actually build a much bigger cascade, more layers in the cascade. I think it's become a lot harder, but the shape of this diagram hasn't changed. It's just getting people to honestly map out, who are they going to take responsibility for influencing, if you like, and what's that span of influence that they've actually got, and then within that span of influence, who are the key point people for them that they could ask to then go on to influence the sort of the next level down. So geographic dispersal is something that we're now dealing with in a real reality, because Certainly I'm not hearing anything from an awful lot of companies about bringing their staff physically back into the office and going back to the world how it used to be until next year at the earliest. I think we all recognise that until there's a workable vaccine, we're sort of stuck with what we've got now. The complexity of the change, I think, increases the numbers because, you know, the more complex something is to explain, the more shadowing, the more support, the more role modelling is needed, the more time gets taken up, the more change agents you need. So you have to be very honest about, you know, just what's involved here. The number of people impacted, if it's organisation wide, which is always my assumption. If it's not that, then it's heaven. But then have to think about who is genuinely impacted. And one of the first things I do when I'm setting up this network is I grab hold of the organisation structure. And I know that I work in a world that's constantly telling me that we are very agile around here and everybody talks to everybody. It's a very flat structure. But I'm wise enough to ignore that and know that there genuinely is somewhere behind the scenes a hierarchy. And go to HR, try and find out what that structure looks like. Try to imagine, you know, because I think it gives you insight into the sorts of levels of control. It's a good starting point. I have never set up a network where I didn't have that behind the scenes going, right, okay, that gives me an understanding of how things are governed around here. How are decisions escalated up? Because I need my change agent network to sort of model that because I don't want to upset everything, to be fair. So hopefully that starts to answer some of the questions about, you know, how you structure it. I'm sure you've got loads more. There was a couple of questions. Oh, Teresa, you're going to...
Yes, we do have a few questions. One goes back to, can a change agent play a dual role as a sponsor for the project from a change management standpoint as well?
That's a great question. Do you know what? Some of my fantastic change agents are actually the chief executives. I was in a conversation on Friday about who are the most effective change agents, and you know, don't discount the C-suite, don't discount senior leaders as those who can champion the change, but let's just see them in context for a moment. One of my CEOs, love him to death. He's a fantastically energetic guy. He's passionate, he's visionary, he's enthusiastic, he's all the things I'd like. But you know what? Let me go back a diagram. I'm obviously not going to name him or the company, but what he's got, he's on the right hand side, right, in that he has very, very high levels of followership, probably because we all love him. He's just a fantastic guy. But although he has fantastic understanding of the strategy of his organization and the longer term positioning of the marketplace, he doesn't have detailed day-to-day knowledge. So remember to place him where he's most useful, which is where I want to fire up the troops and I want to get real enthusiasm. He is my go-to guy. But if I want to have a debate about exactly how this is going to impact a particular process and how this might change the resourcing of how we do something, he's not my guy. So it's great to have a broad range of those kinds of people, okay? But when it comes to genuinely changing the processes, changing the actual steps in how a piece of work is done, the forms we fill in or the drop-down menus that we have for the information that we're passing on, the scripts that we have for what we say to customers, all those sorts of things, all the detailed stuff, then you do need this network. But that isn't to discount the fact that senior executives can be brilliant at really sort of raising the energy levels.
Great. We've got another question. Sometimes projects are delayed and so rollout can be impacted. How do you keep a change agent network engaged and enthused?
I think that when it comes to delays, so if I'm working with a waterfall style big IT project, for example, I often find that they don't provide as much information about when deliverables are going to be available, and I often find that we're working in the dark, and then suddenly the dates change and they've all been pushed out by 3 months. And once, you know, you've got over the urge to kill them, and I just go home and have a large gin. But once I've dealt with that, I think, right, okay. So I've got all these mobilized forces, and I don't want them to be deflated, because you know as well as I do, whoever asked that question's been there, haven't they? And they know how hard it is to remotivate them. It's exactly the same thing with our governments at the moment. They understand that they could ask us to do lockdown once, but actually to redo lockdown and to re-motivate people and to re-frighten people into how serious this is an incredibly hard ask. So I don't let it drop. What I get people to do is say, look, right, they might have shifted the dates, but the change is still coming. Right, let's get ahead of the curve, can we, guys? So what we're going to do is we're going to do some fantastic housekeeping. What of our current processes, knowing the changes that are coming, are we actually going to roll off? What are we going to stop doing? Can we stop doing any of that earlier? And I've had some tremendous success with the creativity people have, because I'm actually giving them permission to say, reorganize now. The IT's coming, but don't make that the be all and end all. Reorganize now. And they have some fantastic successes, and it's giving them the freedom to be that creative that keeps them motivated, and they are doing meaningful things, so they are still motivated.
Great. So here's one more question. Would planned C-suite level communications to the organization as a whole be a key aid to the change network?
Absolutely. I think that to be honest, what I want my C-suite to do is I want to talk about the benefits of the change. I want them to get motivated on the change. Do you know what? I'm going to sort of answer that question in the next slide, because somebody raised a question, and it was obviously a heartfelt question, which she said, that she had a group of people who it was very hard to get support for sort of change agents in her organisation. I'm just looking for the question, because she sort of said they're all caught up with their departmental sort of objectives and priorities, and they're not bought into the sort of wider company changes. How do I motivate my company to be more excited about far-reaching changes, and therefore be more proactive and more supportive of me sort of having a change agent network? So I thought I better answer that question, basically. And I think the thing is, so what you want, and if your C-suite can help with their communications on this, all to the better. And I think hopefully the left and right of this diagram is going to give you maybe the content for those communications. So really the current state is there are problems, and there are departmental objectives, there are strategic objectives, there are generally priorities. Those priorities might be caught up in people's performance management, so that they're held to account on them. Those are in their mind, right? If I don't deliver on these things that I've been told are priorities, then I'm in trouble. And they're also aware of the current problems, difficulties and annoyances of current processes that don't work as well as they could. So that's the current state. Now, the change, we've got to start talking about the fact that the change brings us solutions to the current annoyances. It improves the current situation. And also that it's linked directly, and this is where you have to get clever, it's linked directly to them achieving their departmental objectives. So you can't go in talking about change in a sort of hypothetical, oh, this is going to be so helpful. Dig in deep, and actually you have to show the line of sight between, you know, this objective that you're targeted on, you know, this KPI that you're targeted on. The change is going to help you achieve that. It's going to make it easier to routinely achieve that. So the change, the new ways of working, sits right in the middle. And actually it's those new ways of working that's the change, isn't it? And it's the change that actually delivers that future state. So I think I'm hoping that I've answered that question from the person who sort of raised it about her audience, is that I do think that, you know, the first conversation I want to have with people from the business is actually, what will this change do for you? And maybe before that, I will start to have a listening exercise on what are the things you're most worried about at the moment, what are your current problems, what are the complaints that you get, what are the horror stories, what are the things you dislike the most, because that will give you the problem area. Let's talk about what it is what are the achievements on your desk at the moment, what are you most intimidated about actually being able to achieve, you know, and get them talking about that. And then sort of start to weave in, well, the change is here to make that better. The change is not just something that someone high up has said, oh, we're going to do this now. You have to make the change valuable. Because if you make the change valuable, then you're going to make people want to make the change happen. So there's where you get the motivation for the change agent network. And I think this diagram here is about also, how do we get people to want to volunteer to be change agents? they are going to be responsible for the new ways of working. So what do they get? You know, in terms of their sort of role, they get early access to privileged information, they've got opportunities to be influential, and they get the chance to solve issues that matter to them. Now, some or all of those will be the triggers, I think, for your change agents. Some people like to sort of basically get in early. They like to know what's going on. They like to be in charge of their own destiny. You can call them control freaks if you like, but the bit about being part of the change agent network is that they get to sort of maybe shape a little bit of the new ways of working, certainly learn about it earlier, and certainly be in the front of the queue. Some people like that genuine opportunity to influence the shape of it, but also influence the, sort of the general direction of what's happening. And some people are just very pragmatic and go, right, this is a chance to put things right that really annoy me. And so, you know, you can then talk about the sort of the achievements they'll have about broadening their existing role, increasing their sphere of influence, and great personal development. So sort of have a look at these things. I think this gives you a sort of conversation to have when you're talking to people about what they might get out of it. And as I said, don't forget, you want to also think about this as in the organisation as a whole. Why would having a change agent network be useful, as well as what will a change agent themselves get out of it?
So Mel, question, any tips when the change agents are only loosely affiliated with the organization, for example, contractors?
Then I think you've got on the right hand side, it's basically saying, okay, let's be selfish here. You're a contractor for a reason. You're always trying to make yourself as marketable as possible, not just so that you get your next contract or get retained on this contract, but also the more skills you have, the more experiences that you have, the higher your daily rate. So certainly, I think on the right-hand side there, it's broadening the existing roles, the experiences you have, and also the personal development opportunities that are in there. Because there's no getting around it. Change agents are going to be trained in one of the highest demand skill sets, which is change management. So I think I've never had a problem motivating contractors on this one.
Great. And here's a question. What is the quickest way to set up a change network when joining an organization as a change manager on a very short-term basis?
The first thing you've got to do is, I think you've got to tap in, basically, to talk about, so join as many team meetings as you possibly can. And on Zoom calls, you know, sort of like getting those invites and say, I'd really like 5 minutes of your agenda. Say what your role is, say what the opportunities are for joining your network, what the network's actually going to do. So basically, I've left it up here, the left-hand side, you're going to be talking about the things they'll get a chance to do, the achievements they'll get a chance to have, and basically just get into every team meeting. One of my most successful fast setups, if you like, was that I thought, right, okay, I don't know anybody in this organisation, okay, but I've got the org chart here. I've got a nice lady in HR who's trying to explain to me how the organisation works, and from her I'm starting to work out who all the different teams are, who all the different team leaders and supervisors are. It was a very hierarchical organisation, and they had teams and they had supervisors, then they had a lead supervisor who had 3 or 4 supervisors fitting into them, and then department heads and everything. And I looked at that and thought, heavens. But I just basically joined as many team meetings as possible, and I did loads and loads of stuff, and I asked for volunteers, you know, lots of it, asking for volunteers. So now this will go on to answer that question a little bit more, which is, and you need to be incredibly organized. This chart here is based on an awful lot of experience. Basically, this is just representing all the lessons learned that I've had over the years. So first of all, right, you have got to bring your group together. And I tell you what, there's a very good chance that there will not be a common understanding of what on earth change management is, what it involves, what are change management activities, a great index. And that's not any poor reflection on anybody. I just don't think as a profession we've won that argument yet. And there'll be lots of people in your network who are naturally good at leading themselves and others through change. But I bet you they haven't got much formal training. So try and get everybody on the same page as soon as you can. So lots of webinars, lots of taster sessions. If you're building a bigger network over the longer term, you can do more of these so you can keep the conversation going. But it's a good way to sort of start harvesting volunteers. Make the role guide available for all. And this is something that I think is really important, is that, you know, you do want volunteers, but you also want nominations from line managers, because they, I can be seen as their friend, because, and I'm doing this right now, and I've had some fantastic feedback, because what I am offering is a cost-free opportunity for line managers to put forward their hypos, their high-performing team members, for something new, something different that will stretch them. And it's somebody said to me the other day, oh my God, you're a walking MBA program. Of course I'm going to volunteer people. And I thought, yes. And, you know, and often the thing I can find with my line managers is that they are volunteering people who, perhaps because of their more natural reticence, aren't putting themselves forward, but actually have fantastic subject matter expertise. Maybe they're great team builders, and they'll be fantastic. So I think you have to start talking to everybody about what the role involves, exactly what the activities are that you're expecting people to do. I'm a big fan of accredited training, and that's not because I'm the chief examiner of the Agile Change Agent course. The reason I'm a big fan is that change agents get pushed back all the time. And I think it's really important to give them the credibility that comes with some kind of certification. I've used the Agile Change Agent, I've used the APMG's Change Management Foundation across a large healthcare sector in the Middle East, for example. Either one of those is great, because what it does is it gets everybody sort of up to speed, but it also gives credibility. If you've got a certificate, it does remind you in your darkest hours. No, I do know what I'm talking about. So I'm a big fan of, you need to build confidence. Yeah, it's quite important. And you need to bring them together as a network, so they're constantly sharing with their colleagues in the network how they are helping to create new ways of working. So I think that's key. So basically what I've learned to do is that, you know, the first 3 steps here, you sort of get them to a certain level as quickly as you can. But then what you do is you start asking them to do stuff. So maybe you ask them to facilitate an online workshop, which is talking about ways in which the current process will change, and facilitating discussions with colleagues about exactly what the scale of change is going to be. So we start to do that. And then we bring them back to discuss how they've done that, and then they start to do another workshop, and that workshop might be that how we're actually starting to plan to design the new ways of working. So you basically sort of drip feed them into doing stuff, but always bring them back to share the results, because it's lonely. You know, if you're starting to facilitate change within your sphere of influence, sort of put them next to somebody who's doing the same thing in their sphere of influence. Give them a peer group. It's essential. And facilitate that peer group. You know, action learning, whatever you want to call it, but facilitate that peer group so they can continue to build their confidence and share their disasters, because there will be some. They will have got shouted down by a laggard, for example, and they would be feeling pretty rotten. Bring them back to their peer group to build that confidence. So there's an awful lot of do come back and share, do come back and share, interspersed with training them in practical things. Like I might find that pretty early on, it turns out that I need to give people some training on how to structure and facilitate a workshop, because we might think it's sort of second nature, but it's not always second nature. Alternatively, it might be that we need to have a quick training session on, okay, business analyst, somebody who's a business analyst might do a fantastic workshop on how do you plot a new process, and, you know, just doing those sorts of things. It just empowers people effectively. And then, you know, they go back and apply those techniques to their events. So I think you'll find that the first 3 lines on here, you need to get through those as quickly as possible, and the bottom 3 lines are sort of repeating pieces that you have to keep doing. And that's why I said, I'm going to go back to it here at the top of my, at the top here, these change professionals looking after the network, that's, you know, you do need to sort of take quite sort of a den mother approach. You do have to look after them. because they're sort of going out on a limb for you. So you need to be a supportive network behind the scenes. So I think that's fairly important. And then I know I'm coming to the end, and there'll be more questions, I'm sure of it. So I'll just say this last slide, right? Which is, there were a load of other questions about how do you sort of track the progress? What do you get people to share? And I've just put up a very simple roadmap. And basically, you want them to, one of the most important things, and it's in here, about them taking ownership. You get them to plot out, you know, the changes. They might not be able to do end to end, but certainly get them to look at the first few waves of change. Think about the first few achievements. So get them to sort of plan their own change. And what you get them to think about is wave after wave, and it might be a few weeks, it might be a few months. It depends on the sort of the tangible changes coming out of the projects, but get them to consider what sort of achievement they needed to have had. So in 2 months' time, we needed to have moved off this system onto this system, or in 2 months' time, we will have stopped taking calls from customers because we've actually put a chatbot in place and we're doing other things, whatever the change is. Get them to work through with their colleagues, not just the new sort of steps in the process, the new ways of working, any new techniques, but also things like, how do they have to prioritize this work? Has it changed sort of the power base, who reports to who knows what? Get them to have a really good imagination about, okay, what does that future look like? And then they can start to sort of think about the sort of the facilitated discussions and conversations they want to have. Some of which is sort of like mini group workshops, and some of it is one-to-one conversations with people, nudging them to prepare for the new ways of working. But I think you have to give them a plan. And I think the thing is with change management, that don't fall into the trap when you're sort of trying to track progress of hearing what your change agent's been doing, because you could spend forever listening to all the conversations that they're having. You think, well, that's great. Somebody did this to me the other night, and they sort of carried on talking, and I was thinking, okay, you're showing me that you're really busy. I never doubted that for a moment. And it's great because you're having lots of different conversations with lots of different stakeholders. But let's get back to it. As a result of those conversations, so let's go to achievement, let's go to result, not the activity for a moment. So you've had lots of conversations, but are your stakeholders now starting to work in a new way? You've got to keep them, you've got to focus them back on what they're really supposed to be encouraging, which is that, you know, but how many people turned up to that training session, or how many people have logged into this new system now? How many people have told you that they've stopped using that paper form now? So you've got to get them thinking about asking the question, am I having any effect? So it's all about a simple language of what difference have they got to see in their workplace that would tell them that change is actually happening. They need to really viscerally understand what that looks and feels like. And they're subject matter experts. So get them to work through in their head how the work will be done differently using all of their knowledge and experience. So that gives them a really clear vision at their level in the area that they can influence. Not the highfalutin vision of what we're talking about all the wonders that we're going to do, but right down at the level of a particular process, how will that look different? Get them to really think about that, because that's the vision, if you like, that's the conversation that they have to have with all of their colleagues. So, and that's what they've then got to track against. That's what they've got to nudge people towards. So that's the conversation you want to have. Get them to plot that out, at least a couple of steps ahead each time. This might be a rolling set of change. It might be more agile. So it could be a rolling change, but at least get them to look at the change that's coming up next and the one after that. You don't need to go any much further than that, I don't think, because it blows their mind if you do. But get them to really think about those things. And the shifts that they're going to make, and then you can talk about the shifts after that. But keep them focused on making a difference, not just being busy, because that's the biggest trap I think you can fall into. You can hear how amazing people are, but it hasn't made a difference. and that's what you will look for.
Mel, there's a question here about how do you pivot when the reality of the network is that they have a voice, not a vote?
They have a voice, not a vote. Okay, in other words, they're not being as effective as you would like them to be.
They can have an opinion, I think, but they don't get to weigh in on the decision, on a decision.
Okay, well, we are all takers of change, I think, that whether, you know, the change is happening. I'm not sure I understand the question, but I'm going to say this. So there's 2 points, that they're using their subject matter expertise to try to imagine what needs to change, and maybe they have got ideas that don't get included in the scope, and you might have to mop up on that. Alternatively, it might be that they are working out what all those changes are. They're talking to their colleagues who aren't coming on board, who aren't making those changes, and that's when, you know, that's why we're looking after them as a network, because if that's why I want them starting to talk about exactly what really needs to be different and really socializing that with their colleagues, because if they're getting any pushback at that moment, then we really need to step in and start. We're obviously missing something. We're obviously not selling the change to their colleagues well enough. I don't know what I just did there. What is it that I'm doing? Yeah. I'm not sure I answered the questions. I'm not sure I understood it, but so if anybody wants to have another go at that question and put more detail in, Teresa will read it out to you and out to me in a minute. So does that give you a sort of starting point?
Yeah, I just wanted to also ask this question. In a technology implementation, when do you start a change agent network? This is a waterfall implementation, not an agile.
As soon as possible, because what I have said to my waterfall teams is that it doesn't always make me popular, but I've sort of said, right, okay, let's say you're going to be delivering in 12 months time. Actually, we need to know that you're delivering in 12 months time, because if we've got any long lead times, we need to tell our suppliers about some of these changes, or indeed our customers, because they are going to have to prepare for things. Then, so I really want to think about lead times. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I might not build, let's just go back, I might not build every layer of the network at that point. But what I do want to do is I want to start identifying those key point people, and I want them to have early exposure to the project, the objectives of the project, the key people within. I want to start building key relationships within the project teams. And it might be that this top level is the one that's dealing with some of the lead time issues with suppliers and customers outside of the organization. And then over time, they might bring on some others. But I don't wait and go, well, I'll wait till the last 3 months of the project and then we'll set up the network. I think the concept of the network is actually the concept of change management, which should, at the very least, ideally change management should come first, but hey, but at least that should be in partnership, because I think that my change agents will have a lot to say back to the project, saying, right, okay, if you want us to do that, then we're going to have to make all of these changes. So already they're starting to warn, if you like, the waterfall teams, there's an awful lot of process change that needs to be done to make what you're creating actually go into use. So I think there's I can see I am not worried about starting too early and having people twiddling their thumbs, because I genuinely don't think that's an issue. Oh, I've lost Teresa. Am I all alone?
No, I'm here.
Oh, good. Okay.
I'm here.
Okay. We're coming to the end for the hour. Are there, I'll stay as long as you want. If you've got more questions, fire them at me.
Okay. Why don't you keep presenting, and I'll watch the questions on the chat, and if people want to stay, then they can.
Okay. Excellent. Right. I'm just going to go through a few more questions that I've got here, for example. What do you do when either management or operational pressures undermine the effectiveness of local change agents? Again, I'm going to go to this diagram here, which is that basically I need to so there might be some short-term real big problems in the current state, and that everybody's sort of firefighting on those and basically saying, oh, we need to sort of put the change aside for the moment. The change is not quite as important. And I think you have to take an educated decision. The person who raised that question, I think you have to take an educated decision sometimes. Is if you stick to your guns and you sort of say, no, we must maintain every aspect of the change management plan that I've got. If you genuinely don't recognise the huge pressures that people are under in the business at that point, I think you can lose yourself an awful lot of goodwill. And maybe what you realise is that actually we need to be part of solving this major emergency within the business. Let's be a part of that task force, so that when we come back to trying to get our change back on track, we will have supporters, not those that are working against us. So I think there's something in there.
Got a question here.
Oh yeah, okay.
Would you utilize a permanent change agent network to support business improvement type business as usual changes as well as project related ones?
I think that it goes back to this whole issue of your change agents need to be subject matter experts who haven't given up their day job. And therefore, I've got a network in an organisation that is, they are called the Champions Network. I worry about them because I worry about the permanency of the network, because it implies that if you're in the Champions Network, you're a high performer, you've been specially selected, and it's creating a bit of a them and us attitude. So I think you need to be careful about the permanency issue, because then it just generally it puts this point across that those within the network therefore suddenly become magically responsible for change and everybody else can take a back seat. I think the way that we're going with the huge volume of change we've got now is that what I want to see is as many people as possible taking up the role of change agents within the department. And actually, so there's lots of little improvements coming up. Make individuals within your team the point people for those. You don't just have to have one person who is the change guru, because I think that, again, it's the them and us that worries me greatly.
So here's one. What do you say to senior leaders who want middle managers who may not have charisma or detailed knowledge to be change agents because they see change agents as allowing managers to avoid the need to take personal responsibility for making change happen in their teams?
Yes, I've got one of these at the moment. He has absolutely no personality whatsoever. I constantly feel sorry for his wife, but I imagine she's quite glad that he's at least online most of the day. The thing is, I could sort of moan about the fact that I'm having to spend my time with the most boring person on the planet. But what I've decided to do is look for the good in everybody. And I think the thing is that this guy does have subject matter expertise, and my job is this slide actually is to because he keeps talking about managing the team, and I think he'd like to hide behind micromanagement and checking up on everybody and chasing everybody and delegating loads of stuff, so he doesn't actually have to do any of the heavy lifting himself. So what I've done is I've just got him into a coaching relationship with him, and I've taken him back to his own career path and when he got into the role that he's in now and how he got appointed to that, which was around what he knew and how he was great at shaping the process. And I think he's just fallen into a pattern, which is that, I've got a team now, so they do all the work and I sort of sit on the top. And I'm sort of coaching him around the fact that just by making him fall back in love with the idea of his work and making a difference and rolling up his sleeves and getting involved, and that this change agent role gives him an opportunity to do some of that. And it's been a long slog. What week are we on now? Just looking at my calendar here. I think this must be is it week 15 with him? Heavens. Oh gosh, time flies when you're not enjoying yourself. But yeah, we're getting there, and he is participating now. And I have seen a reduction in the number of times he points at others within his team as if it's their responsibility. So, but I will say, obviously, that's been a very time-consuming thing, and there's no substitute for the fact that you have to get in there one-to-one. You can't just treat them as a group of recalcitrant children. You will have to get into a coaching relationship. And obviously it's coaching upwards, because he's actually quite a senior leader within the organisation, which gives him an awful lot of status to hide behind. And I've had to take him back into the sort of roll up your sleeves, have a bit of a go. And he's having some real discovery moments. So we've had to have a lot of trust between us, because he's had to go, oh, I'm really not sure about that. I don't think I've done that for a long time. And I've sort of said, that's not a problem. Go, have a little look at this, have a bit of a practice. Let's talk about it when you've had a practice. And I'm constantly encouraging, and I'm constantly sort of going, it's okay. You haven't been doing this job for a very long time. I know you've got loads of people doing it, but we really do need your perspective on this to help make it real. And I think he's honestly valuing the fact that, I'm being honest. I can't do it without his input. He's actually got a huge amount of input to share. So, but it's been, as I said, just looking at my calendar now, it has been 15 weeks. It's been quite a long 15 weeks, but I'm starting to see the dividends now.
So Melanie, are you saying that you should accept senior leadership and then work on making middle managers effective change agents instead?
Not instead, as well as. Don't ever think that there is this is not simple stuff, guys. There is no simple equation for how many you should have. There is no simple equation for where they should come from in terms of the hierarchical levels. That it's all about sort of finding those people, some of whom are completely and utterly not willing, but have great subject matter expertise, that is where they do have fellowship, because their specialist knowledge is genuinely valued by others. They might not have the people skills, but they are still valued. And I think we have to work with quite a broad church, if you like. I do think we have to work with quite a broad church on this.
So we've got one other question here that's if you are running a large-scale organizational change impacting multiple departments, processes, and operations, is it better to set up and manage discrete change networks for each work stream who come together at certain points, or treat it as one large joined up change network?
I'm a big fan of bringing everybody together to start with. And if I go back to this, because I think these first 3 steps bring everybody together, and then what I think you find naturally happens, and therefore, and because they are choosing to do it, it's empowering, it's intrinsic motivation. It's just they start to split out into work streams. But I think your question indicates that you would be it sounds awful, but you're prejudging what the work streams are. I think if you bring everybody together and then they start doing stuff, and you actually find that sometimes they've worked out for themselves that it's actually this work stream doesn't really work for them, because the impact of the change is actually a couple of work streams together. And so you find some relationships build up, and they organically create the right network. But that only happens if you've brought everybody together, you've talked about the change, you've upskilled them together, you've created a really great cohort that they can really support each other, and you know that they're going to have lots of their own challenges in their own offices or in their own countries or their own departments, on their own work streams. But just give them some authorship of how they then set up the next layer of the network.
That's great, Melanie.
Oh gosh, we've run over quite a lot, I can see. I can see some people taking notes in the videos, which is this is always quite interesting. So I think
we still got 64 people.
Yes, I know. Yes, they're all still on. Yeah, I'm happy to chat. So what I've done is I'll get Teresa to make this available, but what I've done here is that on my website I've done a page about change agents, and I've just put lots and lots of resources on there so that you can sort of follow this up. And as I said, I think that the most important thing is that Teresa has put on for you the 2-day Agile Change Agent course. She's persuaded me, although I must be mad, to do it in US time zone, which means that I finish at midnight. But we've done it before, and it's gone down. It's been absolute I mean, the feedback on that course was absolutely brilliantly. So we are doing another one on the 13th and 14th of August, the Thursday and Friday in a few weeks' time. And there are some spaces on that course. So get hold of Teresa and get into booking that course. Because if you want to learn lots of techniques for doing this, if you want to learn structure, if you want to get stuff together, then come and join me. There aren't that many places. We limit it at 15 on the course because I like it to be an intimate session where we can share lots of experiences together. So please join us on that.
Great. Well, Melanie, thank you so much for your time and wisdom. You can't beat experience. That's all I can say.
Yes, because I'm old. I've been doing it so long.
Oh, no.
I must have talked. I mean, I think I must have talked with genuine pain in my voice when I shared some of those stories, because you do sit there and realise that, but it's worth it. It is always worth it, guys, because change doesn't happen without this kind of network, because they don't take it to the rest of the organisation. So
Right.
if you want to follow up with me, you can link in with me. You can see my email address there, but you can do anything you like. I'll keep talking. I have plenty to say.
Okay. I think people are starting to
Disappear. Well,
yep, they're starting to go.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much, guys, and I hope I see you on the Agile Change Agent course in August.
Okay, Melanie, thanks again.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.